It's finally October, and I wonder if you've ever noticed this before, that haunted houses, especially like at night when it's dark and you can't see things, they can be pretty terrifying. I'll speak from experience. They can be pretty terrifying. But have you ever considered this? And I want you to think about this before we get into the message with Pastor Trevor today. Have you ever been in a haunted house when it's daylight out and the lights are on and you can see how it works? That's quite a different experience. And this relates to our topic for the message today. So I won't give it all away. We'll get to Pastor Trevor in just one moment after the break, but I'm excited to go through this topic with you today. Thank you for being here and joining us today, and welcome to SMCC Online.
Hey, welcome to SMCC. My name is Trevor. Thanks for joining us today. I'm one of the pastors here, and I am so glad to say that it is officially October, which means we're into the month of pumpkin spice lattes, Sam Adams Oktoberfest, and pumpkin carving as well. And last but not least, it is the season for haunted houses. And I'm sure that there are some of you out there who are so excited. You've been waiting all year for this because this is your favorite season of the year. And I got to say, when it comes to Halloween, Utah wins, right? It takes the cake, it wins the award, it does it better than any other state. And yet, with that, I bet there are at least a few of you out there who are watching, maybe this is you yourself, where when it comes to haunted houses, that is the last place you ever want to set foot in the entirety of this earth, right? You want nothing to do with them, right? Because when it comes to haunted houses, people either love them or they hate them. And I think what's interesting about haunted houses is that for the people who love them, I think what's really going on there, the dynamic is that it's a chance to be scared, right? To experience a thrill and a fright and something that can be absolutely downright, flat out terrifying. And yet through the entirety of the experience, you always have the assurance and you know that you're not in any real danger, that you're safe, you're okay, no matter how scary it gets. Right? Whereas for the crowd who hates them, right, who wants nothing to do with them, I think maybe the reason is because you have a little bit more trouble hanging on to that assurance, which is understandable because when you're in this dark house, right, winding your way through these tiny little rooms and hallways and everything is dark and things are popping out of corners and you're disoriented, you can't tell what's going on. A guy walks in a clown suit and then a chainsaw fires up 2 feet behind your head, right? It can be difficult in that scenario to hang on to an assurance like that. But one of the interesting things about haunted houses is that as scary as they can be when you're going through the fullness of the experience, if you've ever come back in the day, right, or you've been there when the lights have been flipped on and all the monsters and ghouls have gone away and you start to see the way that it's orchestrated, how the route is put together, where the blind spots are, where the dark corners are, where they fire up the chainsaw, right? You see how it's been put together and you understand the mechanics, then all of a sudden it begins to not be scary anymore because you understand how it works. And the same thing is true, not just of haunted houses, but also of something else that has marked the experience of every single one of us, that being doubt. Right? That doubt, in the same way, when it hits us, it can be something that makes us feel disoriented and uncomfortable and even frightened, right? In the same way that a haunted house does. But if we can just understand the mechanics, right? The way it's designed, what doubt truly and really is, then I don't think it needs to be scary anymore because doubt is only scary until we understand how it works. Doubt, just like a haunted house, is only scary until we understand how it works. And depending on, how you grew up, maybe you grew up in more of a religious context, and the reason that doubt is such a terrifying thing is because you were told that doubt is absolutely wrong 100% of the time. That if you doubt, that means there's a weakness in your faith, and that is bad. So you're not allowed to have questions. You're not allowed to doubt. You're not allowed to wonder about things because some things you're just not meant to know. You're just meant to trust and believe. And I think when we grew up in that context, doubt can be something that is marked by a lot of fear, right? It's something that we don't want to experience, and if we have, we don't want anyone else to know about it. And sometimes if that's been our experience, we take that and then transfer it onto Jesus, thinking that he feels the same way, that if we're gonna follow him, if we're gonna trust him, right? If we're gonna live our lives in a way that is pleasing to him, then that means we just need to surrender our questions, right? Push them aside, bury our doubts, shove them deep down inside, just surrender our minds altogether and our capacity for thought, because that's not allowed. Like questions and doubt and wondering, those things are not permissible, because that is not okay, because doubt is bad, right? And if that is what you have heard, if that's what you've felt, if that's even what you've been told and experienced, then I'm happy to say today that that's not at all what Jesus actually says. Right? It's not what the Bible teaches, and it's not what Jesus invites us into. But Jesus actually takes an entirely different stance and an entirely different posture towards doubt altogether. And that's what I want to talk about today. Jesus' heart for those who have experienced and are in the midst of doubt, for those who are confused. Because here at SMCC, we're in the middle of a series called The Banner of Jesus. That's all about understanding not just things about Jesus, but really getting at who he is, right? What his heart is like, what his heart is for you and for I and for all of us in all of these different circumstances of life. And to get at this, we've been using this idea or this image of a banner. Because throughout the Bible, we see a banner being used as a symbol that really points to the authority that a group of people were surrendered to, and even the one in which they found their identity, right? That time and time again, we see a banner, the banner of the Lord, referred to as something that reminded the people of God that God was their God, their authority, the one in which they found their identity, and he was for them. And so it follows from that if we're to live under the banner of Jesus, we have to know who he is, what he's like, and what his heart is for us. And I think in relation to that, this particular topic of doubt matters, right? And is so significant, because if we're to live under his banner, right, to receive him as the ultimate authority within our lives, then we need to know what his posture is towards doubt. Right? Is doubt allowed? Is it permissible? Are questions okay? Or are these things that we just need to shove to the side if we really want to live in a way that pleases him? Right? And again, depending on how you were raised, that may be what you were told. But I think the truth is that doubt is neither good nor bad inherently. But at the end of the day, doubt is nothing more than an invitation. Right? That doubt is an invitation to a journey that leads to truth. And in that way, doubt leads on a journey to truth. Right? Doubt leads you and me and all of us on a journey to truth, if we're only willing to receive and to accept the invitation that it offers. Because that's what doubt really and truly is. And I think along those lines, right, sometimes we think we can't look at the questions, we can't explore it, we can't analyze it, that we just have to push it to the side, right? But really all doubt is your mind trying to reconcile new information with old information. Right? Because sometimes the new information that comes in, it doesn't fit with the old, or it doesn't seem to fit with the old. And so there's a sorting and a sifting process that has to occur that involves asking and answering questions. And that's really what doubt brings about, and that's the way to respond to doubt. That's why here at SMCC, we believe that questions deserve answers, because the only real way to respond to doubt well, or to handle it well and in the way that Jesus invites us to, is to define the questions that are at the root, that are at the heart of our doubt, to then raise them and then find the best possible answers that we can on the basis of the evidence that we have been given. And so that's really what I want to unpack today, what Jesus' heart is for us and what his invitation is to us in the midst of our doubt. And to get at that, I want to look at a couple of different things. I want to start first with a passage that has been misused and mishandled in a lot of ways to teach a lot of false things about doubt, both what it is and how we're to respond to it. And so I want to look at that passage just really to clarify and correct a few things that maybe you've heard before. And then after that, I want to jump into a couple of passages that show us Jesus interacting with people who are struggling with doubt themselves, just to get at what his heart is, what his heart was for them and what his heart is for us even now today. So that's where I want to go today. That's a little bit of a roadmap. So with that, let's go ahead and jump into it. All right, the first passage I want to look at is coming from the book of James. The book of James, which is really a letter that was written by James, who is the brother of Jesus, was a significant leader in the early church, in particular in the city of Jerusalem. And he wrote this letter that is entitled after himself. And so I want to read from a passage here. And just a quick heads up, I'm jumping kind of in the midst of a paragraph and picking it up halfway through. So the full context has some stuff before this, and we'll jump on that. But I want to pick this up at James chapter 1, starting at verse 5. It reads like this. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. But when you ask, you must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. That person should not expect to receive anything from the Lord. Such a person is double-minded and unstable in all they do. Again, I think this is a passage that has been mishandled and mistaught in a lot of different ways. And maybe you're someone who's received some of that, right? And so I just want to break this down a little bit, because I think at face value, when you read that section and kind of rip it from its context, what it can seem to be saying is that doubt is bad. Right? That if you need wisdom, you can ask God for it, and he will give it to you as long as you don't doubt. That you need to have faith 100%, absolutely, the entirety of the time. And if you ever doubt, then that means you have failed. So if you haven't received the wisdom that you ask God for, the natural outworking of that logic is that it's because of your own failure. Right? Because you didn't have enough faith. Your faith wasn't good enough or strong enough because you let doubt slip in. And so doubt is bad. Right, that's what that rendering of this passage leads us to conclude. And what I want to break down and show is that that is not what this passage is saying in the slightest. Because first off, when it comes to interpreting something well, right, whether it's the Bible or really anything else, right, whether it's a comic book or a novel or an essay or an article or a film, right, whether it's, no matter what you're looking at, you need to take the particular section you're looking at and understand it in its broader context to see what came before, what came after, and how that leads us to understanding accurately what is being communicated. And when we look at this particular passage, what we see is that in the very opening of the letter, just prior to this, James is addressing those he's writing to who are Christians, meaning they already trust in Jesus. And they're in the midst of suffering. They're going through trials. And so what James is really saying here to them is that if you're experiencing suffering in the midst of the trials that you're going through, you can ask God for wisdom to know how to navigate the trials better. Because wisdom is different from knowledge, right? Knowledge is new information. Wisdom is the ability to apply the information we already have well, right? It's knowledge applied. And so he's saying if you need the ability to know how to apply the information, the knowledge that you already have well, right, to live faithfully in the midst of the trials that you're going through, then you can ask God for that. And he will give it to you as long as you don't doubt, right, is what it goes on to say, right? That is what the passage is saying. So the context leads us to understand that he's offering wisdom to those who are going through suffering. And he's even trying to reframe their understanding, their perspective, that these trials are actually something that you can rejoice in, not because they themselves are enjoyable, but because of what God is producing in you in the midst of them. Right? And so that's what the prior context leads us to understand, right? That he's not saying that you should pray to see whether or not Christianity is true or whether or not it's not true, right? That's not what he's talking about. And he's not saying that you can ask God for whether or not you should invest in this stock or that stock or whether you should ride the wave of cryptocurrency, right? That's not what this is talking about. It's wisdom for those who are going through trials, the ability to know how to follow Jesus well in the midst of difficulty. And just to anticipate the rebuttal, maybe you're out there and you would be saying, well, yeah, but he does say you must believe and not doubt, right? And so no matter what you say about the context, he still says that. So how do you get around that? And I think to answer that, what I would say is, again, the context helps us to understand that better, to know really and truly what he's actually saying here. Because on the one hand, if you look into that word, there's more going on than meets the eye, the word doubt. because it's not the typical word to be used to give that meaning, but it's actually a word that has a range of meaning and often is used to indicate, rather than doubt, right? It's used to indicate criticizing, judging, and even discriminating. In fact, in the second chapter of this same letter, the same author, James, uses the word again, not to talk about doubt or hesitating or anything like that, but he's describing the situation where the people in the church they have two different men come in, one who is rich, one who is poor. And they treat the man who is rich better than the one who is poor. And he's saying, when you've done that, have you not discriminated among them? It's the exact same word. And so the word is a little bit more complicated than it seems on a surface level, and it has this notion of judging, of criticizing, of discriminating attached to it. But even without that, right, even if we don't have that at our disposal, I think the context that follows helps us to understand exactly what James is talking about. Because when he goes on to describe this doubt, he talks about a wavering, or someone blown about like a wave of the sea, that they are double-minded and unstable in all that they do, right? Meaning it's not the kind of doubt that is intellectual, where a person is wondering whether or not this is true, whether or not Jesus really rose from the grave, whether or not the Bible is trustworthy, right? That's not the kind of doubt that this is describing. But the word unstable, if you dig into that, dipsikos is the Greek word, and it was a word that was used to describe a person who was staggering helplessly from thing to thing to thing in their thinking, which is exactly what the word pictures that James gives us indicate, right? A wave blown about by the sea, which shows us it's not an intellectual doubt. But the kind of doubt that he's describing is the person who kind of likes Jesus, but they also kind of like horoscopes. Right? And they may be fond of Jesus, but they're also fond of crystals, right? And they like Jesus, and they hope that he gives him the answer. They gives him the answer that they want, but they're also willing to go to tarot cards, right? And they're willing to throw in a trip to Burning Man on top of it, right? They're willing to go to whatever they can to find the answer that they want. And so they're not interested in pursuing truth. They're not looking for answers on the basis of evidence to the intellectual questions that they're wrestling with. They have a certain end in mind, a certain answer that they're looking for, and they're willing to take it from whoever will offer it. And James is saying, if that's you, then don't even ask God for wisdom, because wisdom isn't what you want. You're not interested in learning how to follow Jesus faithfully in the midst of the difficulty that you're going through. You just want him to give you what you want. And at the end of the day, you don't even care if it comes from him. You just want to get it from someone. You want the answer that you're looking for. So I think that leads us to see that the passage is saying something very different than what it's sometimes used to say. And I think really what that leads us to see is that there's more than one kind of doubt. But that doubt isn't uniform. But I think you could even say that really there are two types of doubt broadly. That there is a kind of doubt that refuses resolution. A kind of doubt that isn't interested in answers, right? That doesn't want truth. That's not what it's pursuing. It's not what it's seeking, right? But if anything, it uses questions to deflect commitments, to deflect evidence, to deflect the necessity of actually making a conclusion, because it doesn't want truth. Right? It just wants comfort or the particular answer that it's looking for. And it's not willing to accept anything else because it's a doubt that refuses resolution. But on the other hand, there is another kind of doubt that embraces resolution. A doubt that pursues truth, a doubt that defines its questions, that raises them, that seeks out the best possible answers that it can find to them. A doubt that is willing to embrace evidence and follow it to whatever conclusion that it leads to, because it's a doubt that embraces resolution. And my question for you is, in light of those two different kinds of doubt, what kind of doubt do you have? What kind of doubt do you have? I think deep down you probably already know. But if I was to offer you an aid, I think maybe the best question to get at that would be to say, if you could know beyond the shadow of a doubt that Christianity was true, that Jesus is both King and Savior, would that change anything for you? Would you receive him if you knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that everything about him, that he is the Lord and the Savior, and he really did rise from the grave? Would you embrace Christianity, or would you still refuse? Whatever your answer to that question is, I think it tells you exactly what kind of doubt you're dealing with. So that is dealing with the James 1 passage. Now what I want to do for the rest of our time is just look at a couple of different passages that give us accounts of times that Jesus interacted with people who were struggling with doubt themselves. And this first one, it's coming from Luke chapter 7. And the person that he's interacting with is known as John the Baptist. Right, John the Baptist. He's someone that we read about in the Gospels, the books that give us an account of Jesus' life, death, and resurrection, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And he's actually the cousin of Jesus. And earlier in the story, at the beginning of Jesus' ministry, he expresses such faith, such trust in Jesus, right? Saying that he is actually the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world, right? He trusts in Jesus, knowing that he is exactly who he says he is. And yet, later on in the story, John finds himself in hard times. He gets arrested and he's thrown in prison, and it's not the kind of prison that you often make it out of. And I'm sure that he probably had some indication, some inclination of what was going to happen to him, of what his end was going to be. Because it's not long after this that he actually finds himself with his head severed from his body and placed upon a silver platter. And it's in the midst of this difficulty, right, leading up to that he begins to have some doubts. He begins to have some wonder. He begins to have some questions arising within him as to whether or not Jesus is really and truly who he thought he was. And this is how he responds to that doubt. This is Luke chapter 7, starting at verse 18. John's disciples, his students, told him all about these things in reference to a couple of miracles that Jesus had just performed. Calling two of them, right? They're visiting him in prison. Calling two of them, he sent them to the Lord, to Jesus, to ask, "Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?" Right? He defines the question that is at the heart of his doubt. He raises it and he sends them to Jesus to find an answer, right? To find evidence upon which they can answer that question. And there's so much wrapped up within that question, right? Are you the one who is to come? Or should we expect someone else, right? Are you really the Messiah? Are you the anointed one, the King, the Savior, the one that we've been waiting for? Are you that person? Or is there someone else we should be waiting for? And so they go to Jesus with that question. And this is what happens. Picking it up at verse 20. When the men came to Jesus, they said, "John the Baptist sent us to you to ask, 'Are you the one who is to come, or should we expect someone else?'" At that very time, Jesus cured many who had diseases, sicknesses, and evil spirits, and gave sight to many who were blind. Right? He did this in front of them. They witnessed it. And then we get his response. Verse 22, "So he replied to the messengers, saying, 'Go back and report to John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive sight, the lame walk, those who have leprosy are cleansed, the deaf hear, the dead are raised, and good news is proclaimed to the poor. Blessed is anyone who does not stumble on account of me.'" That's his response. And first off, notice what he doesn't do. Right? He doesn't send this message back to John saying, "You just need to doubt your doubts." He doesn't say that you just need to take that question and put it up on the shelf. He doesn't say some things man just isn't meant to know, right? But what he does in response to John's question is he provides evidence, saying all of these things you have seen, you are witnesses to them yourself. Now go and bring an account of these to John and tell him what you have seen and what you have heard. And on the basis of this evidence, he will be able to draw his conclusion. He will have the evidence he needs to answer the question that is at the heart of his doubt, to know, yes, I am the one who is to come. And no, you don't need to expect someone else. He provides the answer by way of evidence. And I think what we need to know, right, if we're going to live under the banner of Jesus, that his invitation to us to deal with our doubt is to do so in the very same manner, to define the question that's at the heart of our doubt, to raise it, and to seek out the best answers that we can find, right? He doesn't ask us to bury them, to shove them aside, to ignore them. But he invites us to embrace our doubt, to receive it as the invitation it is to a journey that leads to truth, to a journey that leads to him, into a relationship of knowing him better. if we're going to live under his banner, we have to know that that is what he invites us to, and that is what his posture is towards us in the midst of whatever doubt and whatever confusion we ourselves are experiencing, right, as we work to reconcile new information with old information. And I get that, depending on your background or maybe just what your experience of doubt has been throughout your life, I get that this can sound strange, right? To say that doubt is not only not a bad thing, but it can actually be a good thing, that it can be a helpful thing in a life of faith, in a life of trusting Jesus, because it's an invitation to know him more, an invitation to pursue greater truth, right? That's what doubt really and truly is. And I think sometimes what can get us caught off guard is that when it comes to doubt, we respond to it on such an emotional level. Because oftentimes doubt comes packaged with all of these emotions that are so negative in their experience that our initial response to it is just to stuff it, to get rid of it, to do whatever we can to just bury it and have nothing to do with it at all. Right? Because the fear and the worry and the anxiety that arises in conjunction with it is something that we don't want any part of. And that leads us really to respond to the emotions, right? To respond to doubt on the emotional level. And when we're doing that, what we're really doing is we're trying to get rid of the doubt by dealing not with the source of it, but with the symptom. Right? In the same way that someone trying to get rid of dandelions in their yard by cutting them down, right? That's never going to work, because all it ends up doing when you try and cut something off at the symptom, it just multiplies both the source and the symptom. And so instead of 3 dandelions in your yard, you end up with 300. And instead of some mild fear and worry, you end up on the verge of panic attacks, because the doubt just gets worse. It multiplies. And if you've ever been there, you know that doubt is no joke, right? It's no laughing matter. You understand, right, the impact that it can have on a person's emotional life, right, on their experience of life, especially when you feel that it's something shameful, it's something bad, it's something that needs to be hidden, something that shouldn't be there in the first place, right? That only makes it worse. But what Jesus invites us into doing, right, is not dealing with it on the level of the symptom, right? But because when we live under his banner, there's a safety in the way that we respond to doubt. We're able, right, to move through those emotions and to deal with it, not at the level of the symptom, not at the level of the feeling, but at the level of the source. Right? As C.S. Lewis says, in religion, as in war and everything else, in all of life, comfort is the one thing you cannot get by looking for it. You can't get it by dealing with life at the level of the symptom, by dealing with doubt at the level of the symptom. If you look for truth, you may find comfort in the end, right? If you look for answers to the doubts that you're dealing with, the questions, then you may find comfort in the end. But if you look for comfort, you will not get either comfort or truth. Only soft soap and wishful thinking to begin with, and in the end, despair. Because inevitably, what a life leads to, that is in the pursuit of comfort and comfort alone, to the absence of truth, all it brings about in your life, right, is that in the best case scenario, discomfort, and at the worst case scenario, what it leads to is absolute despair. But what Jesus invites us into is something altogether different, right? To embrace our doubt and to see it as an invitation to a journey that leads us to truth, right? As we work to reconcile new information with old information. And we can know that because he himself says it, right? In summarizing the life that we're invited into and summarizing really the totality of the law, this is what he says in Matthew 22, that Jesus replied, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment. I love the Lord your God with the totality of your being, which includes your mind," meaning it's not just a shallow emotionalism, right, where you have to surrender your capacity for thought, but he invites you to love him, to love God with the fullness of your intellect, right, the fullness of your mind. And doubt is an invitation to do just that. Now, as we get ready to kind of move towards the end here, what I want to do is look at one other passage where we see Jesus interacting with someone who's dealing with doubt as well. Right? And this one's coming in John chapter 20, and it's right on the heels of Jesus' own death and resurrection, right? Which would have been a horrific experience for his disciples in particular. And after he rises from the grave, he has this interaction with many of his disciples where they see him alive, they interact with him, and yet one of the disciples is not present, Thomas. And afterwards, the other disciples, they tell him about their experience, about their interaction with Jesus, that he's alive again. And yet, Thomas, he's not able to reconcile this new information with the old information that he has, that Jesus is dead. And so what they're saying can't be true because these pieces don't fit together. And what that produces in Thomas's mind is doubt. That he struggles to believe that this is true. And it leads to this question that he is striving to answer, striving to resolve, that is Jesus really alive again? But in order to answer that question, he needs more evidence. And what I want us to see here is what Jesus' response is to Thomas in the midst of that experience, in the midst of that doubt, what his posture is towards him. Because his posture towards Thomas in this passage is the same posture that he has to you and I today in the midst of our own doubt, in our own confusion. So this is the passage, John chapter 20, picking it up at verse 25. So the other disciples told Thomas, "We have seen the Lord, we've seen Jesus." But he said to them, "Unless I see the nail marks in his hands and put my finger where the nails were and put my hand into his side, I will not believe." I will not trust that he is alive. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, right? He turns his attention to Thomas specifically, and he engages with him. And this is what he says: "Put your finger here. See my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side," where he was pierced, right? Stop doubting and believe. Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed, have trusted in me." So we see that Thomas, right, he's struggling to reconcile the new information with the old, and in the midst of the doubt that he's experiencing, Jesus shows up, right? He arises right in front of him, and he presents him with this evidence, right? Saying, "Here, touch my hands, right? See where the nail marks are. Touch my side where I was pierced. See that my body was dead, that I was dead, and yet now I am alive." And that evidence gives Thomas the ability, right, to provide an answer, to reach a conclusion to the question that he had been struggling with. The question at the heart of his doubt: is Jesus really alive again? And when he answers that question, it gives him the ability to trust Jesus and even to recognize him for who he really and truly is. As Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." And what I hope you see in that is that the way that Jesus responds to Thomas and his heart for Thomas then and there is the same heart that he has for you and I today, right? And I don't know, maybe you're going through something now, right? Maybe you've got these doubts that have been plaguing you, things that you feel like you need to hide because they're bad, they're wrong, they're shameful, these questions that you've been dealing with, right? Or maybe you've gone through some kind of deconstruction and you're wrapped up in kind of the messy aftermath of that. Maybe you're even deconstructing now, trying to sort and sift through your faith, asking questions about what is real, what's right, what is true, is this, is that, and trying to sort through it. And it's anything but clean, right? It's a messy process. And what I want you to hear, no matter where you're at in all of that, is that what Jesus invites us into, right, and inviting us to live under his banner, is a life where we see doubt as an invitation to a journey to truth. Right? And we see doubt, right, not as this thing that we need to be terrified about, that we need to hide, that we need to bury, but that doubt is something that we respond to by defining the questions that are at the heart of it, by raising those questions and seeking out the best possible answers that we can find. Right? The best answers that we can find to life's most important and most pressing questions. Right? That under his banner, that is what Jesus invites us to do. It's what he invites you to do. And so as we kind of get ready to close here, what I want to do is just get really practical, and I want to give you an opportunity to do just that, to respond to doubt, maybe in a way that you never have before. right? To respond to doubt, maybe in a way that you've never even been invited to before, right? But to follow that exact process of defining the question or even the set of questions at the heart of your doubt, to raise those questions and then to find the best possible answers that you can on the basis of the evidence that we've been given. I want to give you a way to do that because I think sometimes, we can leave our doubt and the questions at the heart of it, we can leave it so vague and undefined and ambiguous that, it's just so negative on an emotional level that we just want to get rid of it. And yet, like a kid in a haunted house, if we can just turn the light on, right, and begin to see how this thing works, how it operates, then we can respond to it differently, right? And we can define those questions. And so what I want to invite you to do really is there's going to be a number that comes up on the screen that you can take out your phone and you can text this number. You can text a message to it. What I want to invite you to do is actually think about your doubt, right? Just reflect on it, consider it, and define the question that's at the heart of it. Define it by actually writing it out in actual letters and actual words, right? Define it with the utmost clarity so that you can take that first step towards turning on the light and responding towards doubt, right? Not in a way that is afraid of it, but in the way that Jesus invites us to, that you can take that first step and in doing so, accept that invitation that doubt is on a journey to truth. And so I want to give you a chance to do that now. And I'm not guaranteeing that we're going to, find an answer for everything immediately, right? As a church, we do believe that questions deserve answers. And we want to have a chance to actually see the questions that people are wrestling with so that we have the chance to respond to them, right? We want to have the ability to do that. But more than anything, the invitation I want to offer to you is first and foremost, right, to receive the invitation that doubt is by defining that question and by sending it on in. So I want to give you a chance to do that right now.
You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, moving in our midst. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, working in this place. I worship you. I worship you. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. You are here, touching every heart. I worship you. I worship you. You are here, healing every heart. I worship you. Yeah, I worship you. You are here, and you're turning lives around. never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop working. Even when I don't see it, you're working. Even when I don't feel it, you're working. You never stop working. You never stop. You're the way maker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. It's who you are, yeah. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. 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 It's who you are, yeah. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are. Come on, you made a way. Waymaker, miracle worker, promise keeper, light in the darkness. My God, that is who you are.
Thank you, Eli and the band, for leading us in that song and reminding us of the truth that Jesus provides a way out. He is the way maker for us when we are stuck in doubt, and he has a heart for us in that. So appreciate you leading us in that song. One quick reminder before you go, just a quick thing. I know that you might be here for a bunch of different reasons attending SMCC online, but I want to remind you again of this. We have an opportunity for you to learn and grow in how to love others and to love God as well. And that's through small groups. We have a small group that is 100% online just for you. And if you are interested in that, please visit smccutah.org/online small group. Again, that's smccutah.org/online small group. We will be back here next week as we wrap up our Banner of Jesus series with Pastor Eric Nelson, and we're going to be covering a pretty unique topic. Maybe you didn't expect this much in our series, but this is what we're ending with: Christ's heart for those in first place. If that sounds interesting, I hope that you will be back here next week, or even better yet, at one of our campuses. I hope to see you here, or again, at one of our physical locations. Thank you for being here today, and take care.